For Module 2, we had 3 assigned readings, and all 3 are the continuation of readings for last week. What they do generally is extend the ideas of context across time and cultures in order to give us a better grasp on various implications of ideas. The first of these readings, Zhang Ming, was covered in the video for Module 1. We began with drawing from diverse sources as a way to demonstrate the value of looking beyond our own Western context. Our focus should ultimately be on the Western context because that's where we are, but that context covers less than 5% of Earth's landmass and less than 6% of recorded history, which makes it limited in a way that actually prevents us from more efficient problem solving. Additionally, our own ideas did not just fall out of the sky, which means that fully understanding our own context requires that we understand the number of non-Western contexts because they heavily contributed to our own ideas. The part we seem to get wrong most often is that the failures of other societies are in fact just as instructive as their successes. If we can see what approach to social functioning failed and why, then we know what to avoid. If we see what ideas led to a dead end, then we have a blueprint of what not to do. We do this all the time in our personal lives. How do you know that you don't want to be a crackhead? You could try crack and then decide it's a bad option, but by the time you come to that realization and get off of crack, you already were a crackhead. The other option is to learn from the experiences of others. When you see a crackhead, you say to yourself, I need to not do whatever led to that. In a similar way, when we see successful people, we want to emulate them in their success and ask questions like, what did they do to get their success, and how can I imitate that? The same goes for civilizations and cultures. Additionally, studying diverse sources gives us access to something we can't get otherwise. It tells us how to recognize when everything is about to fall apart. You see, we can't learn that on our own. Every society, state, kingdom, and empire faces crises. Things look bad, but then they pull through and their society keeps going. The crisis that destroys them is exactly the same as every other crisis, except that they don't pull through. Now, you could wait for your society to collapse and take notes when it does, but that's not likely. As you've seen in countless apocalyptic movies, TV shows, and games, when a society is falling apart, you have your hands full with getting away from the zombies. No one has time to interview them and take notes. But if we study societies of the past, we can see what leads to their downfall and what they should have done better, because hindsight is 20/20. Learning from the past and from different peoples is no different than not trying out everything on yourself to check if it's a good idea or a bad one. The next article, The Role and Value of Religion, is a continuation of this line of reasoning, but focuses specifically on the varieties of religious ideas and what we can learn from them. We have this phobia of mentioning religion because we're used to religious conversations being about trying to convert or attack someone. But here, we don't care about which religion is right or if any of them are right. All we want to know is the kinds of ideas they bring to the table. We want to know this because religion is the oldest human institution that the fact that it's still around and in overwhelming numbers, with more than 83% of global population identifying as religious, means that it speaks to something that is crucial to human existence and experience. Religion has generally overlapped with philosophy on the kinds of questions it answers. What are humans? Why are we here? How should we live? How should we organize our societies? What must we do? What must we avoid? How do we deal with the idea of human suffering? How do we interpret the world? Etc. What seems particularly interesting to me is that religions come with two separate approaches to educating their members. There's laws, and then there are stories. The laws are abstract rules generally phrased in a way that leave little or no wiggle room. From these core laws, we develop all the rest of religious laws for each religion. This process is actually the same as our modern law. We start with the Constitution and then work out its implications as specific cases arise. Stories are a bit more interesting and multifaceted. Stories are intended to give the readers an applied version of the laws, along with the reward and punishment for obedience and disobedience. They're also written in the same style that philosophy likes to use, the most extreme case scenarios. In a way, they're intending to tell you that the laws must hold even when you're facing the worst possible outcome. And you don't really have an excuse because the stories are already the most extreme case scenarios. The other point of the stories is that the ones that we still have are pretty timeless. What other stories are thousands of years old and we still regularly tell them, remake them in different formats, and are well known by all of us whether we're religious or not, and whether we are of that religion or not. No story can reasonably do that unless it is tied into something we consider critical for human flourishing as individuals and as societies. Case in point, every few years we have a remake of the story of Moses. It keeps on doing remarkably well in the box office and elsewhere. The story of Moses, in its broadest terms, goes like this. A child is born into helpless circumstances where he is about to die immediately after birth. He is set adrift in the hopes that someone will find him and keep him alive. He is found and rescued. Then he is raised but manifests behavior that makes him a social outcast. And then he gains magical powers and fights the forces of evil, becoming a symbol of hope to his people. Now, if you haven't caught on yet, that's the story of Superman. Of course, he is an alien, but the core of that story is identical. That's also the story in Kung Fu Panda 2. Again, we have the differences of pandas versus humans, etc., but it's all good. Also, that's the story with Harry Potter. Are you seeing the pattern? Something about that story resonates with humanity, and so we keep on retelling it. The point is, religion seems to have some very crucial ideas that have helped us survive over the millennia. Can these ideas exist without religion? Maybe. The point isn't whether we need religion like that. The point is, it has something to teach us regardless of the truth of its other ideas. Finally, there is a point to address which is commonly brought up by students and is commonly shared, but which doesn't work if you have any background in religious studies or history or philosophy of science. The claim is that religion and science don't mix. This is called the conflict thesis and is about 150 years old. It has been debunked to death, but like a zombie lie, it keeps getting back up. You can read a brief history of debunking it in the description below. As you'll see in the Module 4, not only do they mix, religion has traditionally served as the basis for studying science. But more crucially, the conflict thesis is incoherent because all societies that we're aware of, for as long back as we have any kinds of records, have been religious, and they did science. In fact, without their significant progress in science, we would be nowhere today. To be sure, religion is not science, and religion does not try to be science. Religious books are not science textbooks and should not be read that way. But religious societies and religious individuals in those societies are the reason we have science. By way of example, Copernicus was religious, and so was Kepler, and so was Galileo. And those three redefined astronomy and cosmology in its entirety. Socrates believed in life after death, and he was the philosopher that started Western philosophy. Locke was highly religious, and he more or less invented the Western political system that we're using as well. Newton was religious, and he set up calculus as well as physics. Mendel was religious and introduced the idea of DNA. Georges Lemaitre, I'm pretty sure I'm butchering that name, was a priest, and he invented the Big Bang Theory, the theory in physics, not the TV show. Nothing in the history of science or scientists in any way indicates that religion and science don't work together. You're all thinking of a few incidents that specifically happened in Europe, and which were not tied to the religious text itself, but the fact that the religious institution in question adopted Aristotle's ideas on science as dogma. If we pause to examine the ideas of different civilizations, of different time periods, of different religious structures, and we do so through the lens of Zheng Ming and wu-wei, we come to understand that there is quite a lot that we can draw from these concepts that are very similar to our own situations and that can be very, very useful. And that's one of the benefits of approaching our studies through the ideas of Zheng Ming. By letting things show us what they are rather than trying to project our ideas onto them, we have a much better sense of both what we're dealing with and how we can make use of it.